I see on the internet people asking how it is possible that the Irish could fight for centuries to free themselves from one foreign influence, the British, only to give their country away to another foreign influence, be it foreign entities like the EU or foreign people like immigrants. People see this as a contradiction, but I think that there is a misunderstanding. To the outsider, there are the Irish and the not Irish. Therefore, any not Irish influence should receive the same reception as the English or the British, but this is not the case. To the Irish themselves, there are the Irish, there are also the British, the French, the Americans, etc., etc. Thus, the fight against one foreign power or entity does not translate to another one. I estimate that if it does translate, then the translation takes about 40 years. Irish history is replete with examples of British rule, colonization, forced deportations, the penal laws, the famine, etc. We as a people are not complacent about the perils of British influence. Even now it is reinforced by court settlements going on at the moment of British security forces collusion in the murders of Irish nationalists, as recently as the late 1980s and 1990s. At the same time, our history makes us absolutely complacent about the perils of being ruled by the French, Germans, or Americans, each of whom were our allies at different times. In the 1990s, the Clinton administration was an ally against the British. We have no experience of being ruled by these powers, and thus no memory of being misruled, so we see no peril as the Franco-Germans rule us through the EU, and as the US rules us through the tech companies and multinationals. It appears to be human nature to have to see it to believe it in that order. You must first see it, and then you can believe it. We have seen what the British can do and did, so we are not complacent about what they are doing now and might do in future. We have not seen what the Americans have done to us, because they are still in the process of doing it. We are in the process of seeing, and only after that can we come to the believing. Until then, the Irish people cannot believe the peril that comes from the Americans as opposed to the British. How long will it take for the Irish to believe? I am not sure, but it could be about 80 years. In 1937, the Irish Constitution was heavily influenced by the Catholic Church, and subsequent decades saw enormous influence from the Catholic Church. But nobody at the time was concerned about it, because the people at that time had not seen the Catholic Church have large influence in Irish political matters, having been ruled by the Protestant British for the previous several centuries. It was only from the 1990s to about 2015 that various scandals were believed, and so people began to see and then believe the perils of the Catholic Church. I refer to sexual abuse scandals, the Magdalene laundries, and the mother and baby homes, as well as forced adoptions. Now this was all in the process of being seen from the 1940s to the 1990s. It was in the process of being believed from the 90s to the 2010s, and now in the 2020s it is firmly believed, approximately 80 years from 1937 to 2017. To return to mass foreign influence in the year 2022, we have to consider when it began. Mass immigration of foreigners began in earnest about 2004. The Lisbon Treaty was passed in 2009. The Troika came in 2010. John Waters has made the case that in 2011 there were a series of events that were de facto a colour revolution. It is now 2022. We are in the process of seeing what all this foreign influence does to us. Therefore, it could be 2074 or 2084 by the time that we believe it. That could be 30 or 40 years too late, for by then the Irish will be a minority, and no longer in a position to act on the belief. However, the 80-year timeline that I gave for the Catholic Church occurred against a backdrop of Irish Catholics being totally secure in their position, being a supermajority of the island of Ireland for the entire period, from 1937 to 2017. When it comes to foreign influence and immigration, the Irish will not be a secure supermajority for the entire time. They are predicted to become a minority sometime in the 2040s. I predict that the belief will come just as the Irish approach 50% of the population. I laid this out in my video on the multi-ethnic state. That is about a 40-year timeline, from 2004 to 2044. 40 years or 80 years is very vague, and there's a lot of room for error. But we can look at other test cases to try to get an idea. We could say that white Americans have picked up on immigration as a threat, as exposed by the 2016 election of Donald Trump. The immigration began in 1965 with the Hart-Celler Act, so that is about 50 years. Then again, the immigration picked up a gear in about 1990, so it could be as few as 25 years. The British today are generally not complacent about grooming gangs, but they were before. If we look at the Telford scandal, then the period is about 40 years based on how long Telford went on. The Eastern Europeans were occupied by the Soviet Union for about 45 years, and today they are not complacent about Russia. People in the 1890s were generally quite complacent about Germany as a military power, but by 1945 they were absolutely not complacent. That's a period of about 50 years. In Northern Ireland, the Unionists felt secure in their majority in 1918, yet by 1966 the UVF had reformed in response to a nationalist peril, again about 40 years. There may be other examples, but I would say in general that the period between a new peril emerging and people reacting to it is at least 25 years, probably 40 to 50, and maybe up to 80. Thus, when people see the Irish fight the British for centuries, and then roll over to immigrants today, it is because we had the British for centuries, and immigration proper for only about 20 years, and it takes 40 years for any reaction to occur.